What are the AI laws that every tech business should be aware of in 2026?
The UK does not, in fact, currently have any form of AI regulation as a standalone bill or act of parliament, which I find truly shocking as a tech lawyer, I have to say.
How has AI actually changed the way lawyers work today?
Everything we do is about data in law. We have so many tools now that significantly speed up that data processing aspect, so we can focus on the emotional intelligence aspects that our clients are craving still.
What are the expensive, avoidable kind of legal mistakes that you see founders make again and again? Joining us today, I'm very excited for us to welcome to the show Professor Dr. Funke Abimbola MBE. She is an award-winning corporate lawyer, is a C-suite diversity, equity and inclusion leader. She's an AI governance expert, a healthcare executive. She's also a BBC media commentator, a non-executive director, a TEDx public speaker and podcast host, and a proud mother who was awarded an MBE for her work in diversity leadership. Welcome to Building Great Tech. It's an absolute pleasure to have you join us today.
Thank you so much. I always sort of find it a bit baffling when people reel off all these titles because, genuinely, I can't recognize how I've gotten here. It's just been one step at a time. So I'm delighted to be on the podcast, and thank you so much for having me as your guest.
Oh, you're most welcome. Just to kick us off, what are the AI laws that every tech business should be aware of in 2026?
Right. So we are based in England. I'm a solicitor who's licensed to practice in England and Wales and also in Nigeria. And the first thing to be aware of is that we don't have anything like a global, all-embracing, all-encompassing AI regulation. We have a regulation in the EU with the EU Act. The UK does not, in fact, currently have any form of AI regulation as a standalone a bill or act of parliament, which I find truly shocking as a tech lawyer, I have to say. And then other parts of the world have a very different appetite. Nigeria, where I was born and where I have one of my passports, has a very different approach to AI governance compared to other countries. So it's really tricky if you're a global company operating across the world. You need to be very aware of what's happening literally on a country by country basis, Simon. So it's a real problem. It's a real challenge for businesses.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're based in the UK, if your business is based in the UK and you're selling to UK-based UK customers, what would you say is the most important thing right now to pay attention to if you're a business owner?
Well, the first thing is to recognize that if you want to expand into Europe, which many UK businesses want to do as part of their next stage of expansion, is that you immediately become subject to all the EU stuff. So although we've left the EU, that's something to be aware of. Their responsibilities at board level and so many other intricacies that a lot of UK businesses that I talk to all the time are completely unaware of. And the other thing to be aware of in the UK as well, Anastasija, is that we have piecemeal aspects of law that do apply, that may catch businesses that are either operating, heavily reliant on AI or developing AI, either developing agents or other AI tools. So it's really good to be aware of what the framework is, depending on where the business is based. And importantly, Anastasija, where the expansion plans are as well.
And obviously, as Simon mentioned, sorry, did you want to ask?
No, I was just thinking it's like such a minefield for business owners of
at the moment.
Where do you go?
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to ask you, because obviously Simon mentioned your very impressive career, and you were, for a decade, you were a corporate lawyer. then some kind of like also working in-house for Roche, and also now fractional general counsel, right, for growth stage startups,
Yes.
which is really, really impressive. But from inside the legal sort of profession, how has AI actually changed the way lawyers work today?
So lawyers are very risk averse, Anastasija. We are trained to be very conservative, and for lots of good reasons. So the way that legal tech has developed has been relatively conservative, if I'm honest, compared to some of the industries I advise within. I advise within healthcare, for example, and healthcare has had to be a lot more progressive about AI adoption because we're processing high volumes of patient data and lives are at risk if we can't process that data quickly enough to get the drugs onto the market to help save patients' lives or prolong their lives. But within law, we've had a very, very slow and rather cautious adoption. But I'm really pleased to say that there's really significant inroads being made. Everything we do is about data in law. As a corporate lawyer, every contract I review is data. Every email I get from a client, we have so many tools now that we can use as lawyers that maintain confidentiality, all the security aspects that we have to adhere to, but significantly speed up that data processing aspect so we can focus on the emotional intelligence aspects that our clients are craving still. That human touch is still very important.
Hey guys, we're really hoping that you're enjoying this episode so far. And if you are, please like, subscribe, and follow. And if you really want to know more about who we are and what we do, go to buildinggreattech.com. Now let's go back to the episode.
How is it kind of impacting your day-to-day life, and what you do,
Yes, that's a great question, Simon. So it's twofold. With the legal tech tools, my day-to-day role is a lot more efficient. I've never been more efficient because AI, you divide up the tasks that make up your job on a day-to-day basis. And some tasks are fantastic for AI to support you with. I'm sure you find that all the time in the work that you do. And there are other aspects as a lawyer where the clients are crying out for me to either physically be there, meeting them for a coffee, or actually, Funke, we need to talk to you. We develop AI tools ourselves. We're not going to rely on those tools to calm us down when we're fundraising. Very real examples here, Simon. When we were having challenges with fundraising recently with one client, they didn't think, oh, let me go to an LLM or let me find a tech tool that will help me. They immediately thought, Funke, we need to talk to you. What do you think? In your experience, what can help? Who do you know that can help with this challenge? And that's the key message I want to get across, actually, if nothing else, is that, my son's a programmer, so he writes code all the time for a global consultancy. Many of his clients are AI developers. And he said, you cannot program for emotional intelligence. It's never going to come to a stage where we're going to have robots, machines, AI, lines of code, replacing the very nuanced thinking that a unique human being can have. And I rest on that. I will die on that hill, if I may say so.
I love that. And that's so great to hear that somebody on the inside, your son, a coder, developing engineer, has that kind of trail of thinking, because that doesn't come across so clearly in a lot of what's kind of online.
Yes.
One interesting question I wanted to ask you around your kind of use case in day to day. How do you manage hallucinations? Is that something that you kind of find challenging when you're using it in your workflow?
So we're very careful as lawyers. Our regulator mandates that we need to meet certain obligations. As a solicitor, I'm an officer of the court, and that comes with a huge amount of responsibility, and rightly so. I'm dealing with some very serious issues for clients. So because of that, the AI tools that lawyers use have to meet certain standards, very, very high standards. And the training ground that they use, all AI tools are trained on data. That has to be, specific to the work that we do. So hallucinations, if we're using the specific legal tech tools that meet the regulators' requirements, those hallucinations, they don't happen. I mean, the likelihood of that happening is very, very slim, just because the training data is specific to what lawyers do, and it's actual case law, it's actual things, acts of parliament, it's actual sections of acts that exist in England and Wales, rather than elsewhere in the world. And the other thing that's important, and this goes back to the point I made about the human point and the human angle, is that I will still rely on my experience when I'm reviewing some of this stuff, right? Because I know which sections of the Companies Act, for example, I need to be looking out for, the Enterprise Act, or whatever piece of legislation it is, what regulation. And it's only that human experience that will tell you, well, this actually doesn't apply here, or the reference here is incorrect, or the reference to that case law, that's incorrect. It's actually now a Supreme Court decision. This is where, even with the sort of well-trained AI tools for lawyers, you still need that human touch. You still need, I would never send anything out to clients without having reviewed it, Simon, myself, because I know intuitively, having worked for over 25 years as a corporate lawyer, I know exactly where the nuance lies and what's right, what's wrong, what sits where it should, what doesn't belong, even though AI says it does. I'll know as a human being that for this client, this is the nuance that needs to apply to that particular piece of advice.
Yeah, I love that. That contextual kind of understanding. And it's good to hear that, there are industries really clamping down on that. I mean, ChatGPT's new model has just been put on the shelf, hasn't it? That's not being rolled out. The White House is saying we need to check for security purposes, the same as they do with Claude's new model. And I think that's a good thing if governments potentially are a bit more involved with this process of releasing these models kind of out into the wild. So it makes sense that legally, in the legal world, there would be those solid requirements, just making sure things are aligned. That's good.
Yeah.
Lots of
Very
industries
important.
could learn from that.
No, it's essential.
And Funke, you mentioned that you work a lot within the healthcare. I wanted to ask you, how is AI being sort of adopted within the UK health system, like NHS? Like, how do you find it? How is that going?
So the healthcare industry, and specifically the global pharmaceutical industry, where I started my career in industry as a corporate lawyer, has been using either AI tools or machine learning or adjacent tools for a significant period of time, several decades, because, where I worked previously, where we were actually investing a lot in clinical trials, we were originating the actual drug. We were the ones significantly investing in the research and development. And, the clinical trial process is very robust. It can take up to 15 years. And you're dealing with volumes of data, patient data, that you can't get your head around how much patient data is being dealt with and how important it is to be able to process that quickly and accurately. And for a very long time, it's been recognized that human beings, we naturally have our limits in terms of how much data we can consume and categorize. So, the global pharmaceutical industry, within certain safeguards, has been using technology to process clinical trial data for decades. It's not something that's widely publicized for all sorts of reasons around sensitivity and so on. But now that it's much more okay to talk about that, various companies they're using that as sort of a selling point almost to sort of stand out from the crowd. But AI tools and technology tools are literally driving efficiencies within the NHS right now. That whole area of how do we process the data? Again, the NHS is very records based. It's one of the best healthcare systems for being able to identify uniquely a patient. We all have an NHS number, and that number should track us throughout our lives. I mean, there's some challenges with duplication of some numbers, and but by and large, you can actually track a patient from the moment they're assigned an NHS number. And because of the way that the NHS budget works for everything, records are kept even around that, because there's tight budgets. And so we're very, very fortunate in the UK to be able to say that we have a huge incentive to maintain these healthcare records because the budget is so limited. And the way that drugs are actually assessed for funding is down to the efficacy, if you like, of these records. All of that is enabled by technology, and more it's AI enabled as well. It's a massive part of what's driving efficiency within the healthcare system today.
Yeah, I think you, when we spoke before, you said that you had a great story you'd like to share about your son and the use of AI being
Yes.
implemented. Do you want to tell us about that?
Absolutely. It's an extraordinary story because when my son was 15, he's now 23. He played rugby for 10 years up to that point, and he'd been injury free all that time. He plays in second row. For anyone who is a rugby fan, he's very tall, very strong. So he was in the engine room, as it were, in the scrum. And he'd never been injured in all that time, but rather unfortunately, on his 15th birthday, someone landed on his dominant arm and broke. It was a very, very bad break. In a key year at school, he was in year 10, which is a critical stage in secondary school, and the timing could not have been worse. His birthday, critical stage educationally, and so on. What was even worse than the shock of all that was the actual patient pathway, as we call it, for him to be able to access, the orthopedic surgeon, or, whoever. Orthopedics is the bones, the doctors who specialize in bones and fractures and things. Trying to access that in an efficient way was a job and a half, Simon. We ended up initially going to local A&D, then we were referred to a unit elsewhere, and then finally we were told that actually the fracture clinic was along the A1M, which is a motorway near where I live, and it was a 20-minute drive, and then the car parking was an issue, and it was going to be 6 weeks of weekly visits to this fracture clinic. I was working locally about half an hour away. It was a very busy time of year. And I mean, I can't tell you how inconvenient all of this, quite aside from having a miserable 15-year-old who couldn't play rugby and couldn't write and had his arm in a cast. The actual patient aspect of this was horrific. And that carried on for the 6 weeks. And I remember when I first managed to access the orthopedic registrar as a senior doctor, finally got to the doctor who was going to tell us what was going to happen at long last. The first thing I said to him was how bad the Wi-Fi was in the waiting room, because, I was trying to work, when all this madness was going on. And he did write some notes, which I'm sure weren't terribly complimentary about me and his patient record. But I come from a family of doctors, and I know that doctors do this. So it was horrific. We had to grin and bear it, and it was awful and miserable and all the rest. The standard of care was exceptional. The actual clinicians were wonderful, very empathetic and all of that. Fast forward 10 years, so, 10 years or so. So I'm now actually working for the company that has developed an AI-enabled tool that has completely revolutionized the pathway. What happens when something happens to a patient? How do they access the patient? What's available to them? And how quickly can we get them out of the system, right? No one wants to be in the hospital, the GP. We all want to be up and running and back in our normal lives as soon as possible. This company had come up with a very simple line of code that revolutionized that pathway. If my son were to break his dominant arm now, it would be very clear where we had to go to. There'd be an app. The 6 weeks would be reduced to 4 weeks. We'd be able to upload scans, photos. I mean, the options now are unbelievable. But when it happened when he was 15, we had to physically go to all these places. And that is a very real example of how AI is revolutionizing the healthcare system.
And is there a name for that app, or is it part of NHS sort of support?
It's not, and I'm happy to give the company a shout out. It's called PathPoint, and the company is called Open Medical, and it's a clinician-led company. I was their general counsel at a key stage in their development until about 2 years ago. And it was set up by very frustrated orthopedic surgeons. They'd had patients complaining about these issues that I've just explained to you. And one of them had been a programmer from, his teenage years and just came up with a solution that has now been rolled out across the NHS. I'm very happy to give them a shout out, because the work that they're doing is revolutionizing the NHS. But there are many companies doing the same thing in different parts of the NHS. It's revolutionizing the NHS.
That's fascinating. I love that. And so then how would somebody actually know what to download in order to access that? Is there like a site on the .gov website, just out of interest? Like, where does
Yeah.
somebody go? Because you think I know, call 999 and
Yes, yes. So it depends on what has happened to you as a patient, right? For us, it was a dominant arm being broken, so we went to A&E. That was our point of entry. Most people come in through their GP. That's the way it works in the UK. The vast majority of patients have to access healthcare. It's a non-emergency situation initially, and then your GP then refers you to what we call the secondary care aspects. So that's a hospital setting, whatever it might be, X-rays, MRI, whatever. And it's at that point, in fact, many GP practices, one of my current fractional clients is a digital health company within primary healthcare, within the GP side. They are doing incredible work to make even the GP side more efficient, because as I'm sure you can imagine, Simon, that's where the highest volume of patients are coming from, is the GPs. They're the first point of entry for the vast majority of patients who need to access the NHS.
yeah.
So even that's been revolutionized. How can we make that more efficient, GPs more efficient, and how they triage, where do we direct this patient? Where's the best place? And the sooner you can do that, the better for everyone. It saves time, resource, quality of life is better. It's a wonderful thing, and I really wish that there was more publicity around, this aspect of AI within healthcare. But unfortunately, some journalists, rely heavily on clickbait and not all, but some. And it's not in their interest to sell positive stories. They have to be sensational. Unfortunately, that's the case. But it's wonderful what's happening. It really is superb.
Love that.
Yeah, it's very, very inspiring. It's good to hear something positive about NHS, honestly, and AI.
Yeah.
Going back to, you mentioned that you work with a lot of sort of growth stage startups, companies in tech space. If somebody is building right now using sort of AI, doing their automation of their services today using AI, what's the sort of one thing the founders need to get right around usage of AI, in your opinion?
So they need to be very, very aware outside of what their key priorities will be initially, which is just testing the technology to make sure that it works and that, it can be commercialized and scaled up. And, all of that good stuff is still very, very important. But what they need to be very aware of is the governance framework, Anastasija, that applies to them. And that's linked to what I said earlier on. Where are they launching? Where do they anticipate growing? Because the frameworks vary hugely depending on where you start and the product and the service. Is it cross-border? Does it have EU implications? For example, in America, which is a very large market, every single state has its own appetite and ways of adopting AI. And, at the moment, there's over 1,000 different pieces of legislation and cases across the states, all affecting AI use. So, it's a real sense of being very, very clear about what your growth plans are and the governance framework. When I do the AI governance advisory piece, it's about responsible and ethical use of AI wherever you are in the world. I'll give you a very good example. I've recently just onboarded a global client that is operating within communications. So they're AI developers, they use agents, etc. Their clients tend to be the large global pharmaceutical companies and higher education institutions that do a lot of research. Patient care is a very important part of what they do. And they operate globally, China, Japan, America, EU, all over the world. And a key part of what I'm doing for them is advising across these different regions what needs to be done. And how do we roll that out in a pragmatic and practical way? You know, I'm a business person first. I'm like, I want to bring this business plan and strategy to life. How can we make sure that we keep an eye on the bottom line as we're rolling this out, whilst also making sure that we don't fall foul of what the governance frameworks is globally in all these different countries? And it's wonderful to be a part of that journey, you know, to help the strategy to come alive, to really help to inspire and motivate the sales staff, for example, who are selling these solutions to the clients, to be able to say that we're very aware of what the governance framework is in this particular country is a huge sell to those clients who are buying the product. So I love what I do. I find it very rewarding.
I can tell you look very happy talking about it.
Even on one of the hottest days of the year in the UK.
Yeah, I love that. But really exciting role for you to see these startups grow and globally, and like challenging to kind of get your head around this constantly moving landscape. But no doubt, very rewarding.
It's wonderful.
Question for you: what are the expensive, avoidable kind of legal mistakes that you see founders make again and again?
Especially in UK, I would say.
Yeah, especially in the UK.
Especially in the UK. So within the space of AI, it's being very aware of what the insurance obligations might be under, because it's all about risk and how you can mitigate that risk when it comes to AI, especially with agents. You know, it's still a developing area as to even the insurance brokers are really struggling to assess what risks might look like if a client actually develops agents and, you know, their business model is very reliant on that. And if they're then selling on that as a solution. So I would say that that's one of the key things to watch out for and to really, really focus on in all its complexity. You know, have a look at the contracts where, you know, commercial contracts will often have a contract around insurance cover. And it's fairly bog standard wording until you're an AI developer and you suddenly have to look very carefully at the, you know, what the heads of cover for cybersecurity and all these sort of tech related things. Are you already in breach because you actually don't have that cover? You can't confidently say you have that cover. Indemnities are now very, very important as well. And it's very important to be aware. That's another way of trying to cover off that element of risk for the clients. And a number of the businesses I've spoken to have admitted that they are already automatically in breach of these contracts because, you know, with the best will in the world, things are moving so fast that they can't keep on top of what needs to happen on insurance, indemnities, the products they're developing. So I would say the whole area of risk and liability, more than anything else, is something to look out for if you're developing AI as a tool, agents, or, you know, if your business model is heavily reliant on AI. It's really important to be aware of that.
That's superb advice. Okay, so that's going outwards, building out into the market. What about on the other direction where you're feeding, you know, you're a founder, building your new business and you're kind of training and feeding these models? What's the risk around like your own kind of founder IP?
Yes, yeah. So there's so many aspects to that. You know, there are data protection aspects to the models, you know, the training ground. Making sure you have consents from certain people to use the data. I've spent a huge chunk of my career sitting alongside software engineers, looking at lines of code, looking at where the data is originating from, where is it going, you know, how is it being changed? Can we identify the data subject? You know, data protection legislation is very important in this area when you can identify an individual with some of the data. So that's very, very important as well. And how that then feeds into growth plans, fundraising. You know, I've got a client at the moment. We are looking at, we've done very, very well. And we are now looking to get a loan with a bank. Now, at the moment you start looking at a bank, a whole raft of obligations kick in and, you know, banks keep an eye on at what they call the financial covenants. These are the promises you put in the contract about what you will and will not do, and they will, pull the plug relatively quickly if you're in breach, right? So we're going through that exercise at the moment of making sure that we're in good place now, so that we're not going to be in breach, and that we have the systems and processes in place to make sure we're never going to be in breach. I don't ever want us to have a situation where an aspect of our funding is pulled because of a breach that's happened innocently, but it's still a breach of the contract, the loan agreement. So these are the sorts of things that become very, very real, even when you're successful. Even when you're commercializing, you need to be very careful about what your processes are and that they're fit for purpose.
And especially like I wanted to ask you around customer data, right? Because a lot of companies that even we work with, a lot of founders, they just collect, let's say they interview their customers, right? For some kind of customer success and customer sort of satisfaction surveys. And what often happens, they just throw that data into, ChatGPT and so on, and just to get some insights. Like, what do they need to be careful around doing this kind of,
Yeah.
exercise?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there are two things to watch out for to make sure at the point of capture that the customer is fully informed as to what the data will be used for. Like, no sort of grey areas, being very, very clear, and that you have their consent to the use of that data for those purposes. That's the first thing. And also that you're properly notified to the data protection authorities for processing data in that way. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is to be very, very clear about the safeguards that whichever form of LLM is that you choose to use has in place. So ChatGPT is very, very different to other, all the LLMs vary hugely, depending on what their training ground was, what they were set up for, etc. Some are more secure than others. I won't cast any aspersions over which ones. But it's really important to be aware of that. For example, as lawyers, we can't use ChatGPT because our regulator, as we're officers of the court, and it doesn't meet the requirements, and we absolutely cannot use ChatGPT. In fact, we lose what we call legal privilege. So if a case goes to court, and there's lots of protections. Recent cases have decided that for us, just to make it clear for anyone who is in doubt that ChatGPT, you lose your privilege. It's not considered a secure environment for a lot of what lawyers do. So we use other tools that meet those benchmarks. But that aside, lots of LLMs do meet the requirements for different settings. My key point is be very aware of which LLM you're using and be really sure that it does meet the security requirements for your business, for your clients' understanding, for your insurers. Is data being used as a training tool for developing this LLM further, for example? That's something that you really need to look out for, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. They just think about the convenience of using the LLM, the speed of getting an answer from the LLM.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because I think some of them have that option, right, to switch off like the training LLM in the system. But I always have a bit of a fear that even if you switch that off, you don't know what's actually happening with that data, right? And you're saying some of them are slightly better and you can trust more than others, and make sure that you know which one to use.
Yeah, I mean, the Microsoft environment is considered, Copilot, for example, is considered to be very, very secure. And, that's one that, certainly I use for certain types of work. But there's a whole plethora of specific legal technology tools as well that we use, because it's tailor-made, it's been developed with lawyers in mind and with all the security safeguards, client confidentiality, obligation safeguards, etc. And lawyers have to be very careful what they use with AI. And other industries will be the same, depending on what they're using the AI for. So it's really important to be aware of that.
Sorry, you want to ask something?
I was just going to say that's actually kind of reassuring, because I think it's probably really obvious that that is the case for you being sort of in the world. But I'm thinking, there's so many fear mongering of government being so behind, and if you see some conversations happening in the White House, and like these tech entrepreneurs having conversations to people governing the country, and you can just see that there's a massive disconnect between what's being said and what's
Absolutely.
being understood. So it's good that, like, in the niche of industry,
Yeah.
things are being held accountable. And
Oh, yes, they are. And as lawyers, we're personally accountable as well. I mean, my personal license to practice is at stake if I get this wrong. Likewise with doctors, accountants. There are many professions where your principal obligation is to your professional body, actually, and it can affect your livelihood in a very real way. And then we're also then, by implication, if we're aware of others who may not be in the profession doing certain things, we're on the duty to disclose. And, there's all sorts of ways in which the overall governance framework is kept in check. So thank goodness we have lawyers, accountants, doctors in the system. These older professions are worth their weight in gold, really, when it comes to regulation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I also wanted to ask you, because I've heard that there's some kind of UK regulations coming in August, so is that correct? And I wanted to ask you, if somebody sort of building now something like platforms or working, even using AI for presentation for, clients, sort of presentation purposes, is there a requirement, or will be there a requirement from August, I'm not sure, to disclose to the client that you are indeed using those tools?
Yeah. So there's a big push for transparency. You raise a very important point. These things are changing all the time, and the best source to go to, and it's freely available, is the UK government's website. They will always publish the latest on where we are with all sorts of regulations, but specifically around AI. And it's in their interest because it drives industry and economy and all sorts of things. That's the best place, because things, as of right now, that's what's happening, but anything could change. We've just had a change of a PM stepping down. We don't know. I'm meeting a number of politicians next week who, when the meeting was put in the calendar, we had no idea that we'd have the current situation, right? So we just don't know where things will be by August. But the UK government's website always has the latest on where things stand. And they have a very large communications team that keeps that up to date. So that's the best tip around that.
Very good to know that.
That is good.
Yeah, it's good to know.
Yeah.
And yeah, who knows what's going to happen now with the prime minister change. Do you find founders kind of like trying to use the sort of AI legal tools, like Genie AI, and do you find them like actually genuinely helpful for them, maybe as like a starting point, or can they get into trouble using all this thing in place of actually getting advice from somebody like yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we tend to find that founders tend not to sign up for the legal tech tools themselves, because the licenses are quite a premium, in terms of pricing and so on. And it assumes quite a lot of knowledge, actually, before you actually can use those tools. What I have found is clients do use ChatGPT. I had a client, one of my clients earlier this year was, we had a meeting, and he had run the advice through ChatGPT using a 5-star system, the wrong prompts, references, the citations for the legislation was parts of the world that weren't outside the UK. So the advice was wrong. And, so it was rather frustrating for me because the meeting went on far longer. But by the end of the meeting, he was left in absolutely no doubt as to how important it is to have someone who is qualified in that jurisdiction. He's not done it since, to be fair. But it's something that happens all the time. And, frankly, if I was a client, I'd be doing the same, right? I mean, you're hearing that LLMs, they have all this information, and you want to come to your meeting feeling like you're prepared. Of course, you're going to run it through ChatGPT, which is a reasonably priced LLM to access. but very quickly becomes clear that it's not actually fit for this purpose. But it can be great for other things, planning holidays, advice about how to run your team dynamics. I mean, I use it for so many things outside of the client confidentiality space. And it's invaluable. It's invaluable. So all these AI tools have their uses. And for me, it's all about responsible use.
Makes sense. Yeah,
Great
makes
advice.
sense. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing there is stay well away from the LMMs when it comes to legal advice.
Yes.
And your recommendation for any founder on their journey to kind of building, at what point would you recommend getting professional advice?
Well, I would say the moment you have your business plan in place and you know what you're going to be doing, for the first year, etc., 3 5 years, and what your growth plan is, and once you've registered a company and you've asked an accountant, maybe to be your company secretary, at that point it's worth getting legal advice. The earlier you get a lawyer on the ground, the better, because there's so many things that we're then having to correct later on. I'm having to deal with that now with one of my clients who dearly wishes they had me on the ground early on. And because I don't work the way that most lawyers work in the UK, through a traditional law firm. I'm a general counsel. I'm a senior in-house lawyer. So, I sit at board level. I see the whole company and everything. I'm very familiar with the industry and can cover, 99% of what comes in, given the experience I've had and where I've worked. I can deal with data protection, corporate, contracts, AI, all these things, pensions, employment. It's really important, I would say, to have an in-house lawyer on board as soon as possible, because they have the true helicopter view of the whole company. And very quickly, the CEO starts relying on me heavily because of that helicopter view. I had an example just this week where a CEO reached out and said, "You're the one who sees all of this stuff. What do you think about this?" And I picked up on something that an advisor had missed completely because they only saw one aspect of what we were looking at. So it's really important to get the right lawyer on board.
Seems like you're like a Swiss Army knife, like you have everything included. 20 things in one. That's amazing. We want you on board.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So you said that there's no actual UK AI Act in place.
There isn't, no.
So what law is like a UK SaaS founder actually subjected to today when it comes to AI?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Simon. So it's a plethora of different laws at the moment. Data protection, the online, lots and lots of different laws around what you can do online. Laws around the contracts, how you trade, how you do business, all of these things. And this is the challenge that businesses have, is that if only we had the equivalent of the EU AI Act, we would know that we can rely on that, at least for the AI aspect. At the moment, in the UK, clients who I work with, where I'm general counsel for them part-time, we're having to have this sort of piecemeal approach, and you need an expert to help you with that, to navigate that. We really do need this regulation in the UK as soon as possible. So that it matches the data protection stance that we have. We're global front runners around data protection regulation. I would love to see AI follow suit, really.
Yeah. Are you supporting with that in the UK, the government?
I am, yes. So it's interesting how solicitors always manage to get everywhere, Simon, within government. We've had a number of solicitors be prime ministers and front benchers and in the cabinet. And a number of the members of the House of Lords are solicitors that I'm very, very close to. A number of them are sort of heading all-party parliamentary groups. One of them is pushing for the AI regulation very, very heavily, doing a fantastic job. And I've been supporting their work, and that work remains ongoing. Now with this recent change in government, we're having to navigate once again a new context and landscape. But it matters so much for not just for business, but for education, young people, healthcare. There's not a single sector, Simon, that wouldn't benefit from this AI regulation. And you're right, I'm very heavily involved in that work through the House of Lords.
And I wanted to ask actually, because, we're hearing so much negativity, especially from businesses in the US, saying that UK government is actually harming the innovation. But it seems like UK government just want to be kind of careful with how it sort of approaches AI. And of course, in America, it's kind of like a wild west in terms of, like, especially recently, I think was it Donald Trump that kind of in some states is like there is no almost a specific regulation. How do you view that, like US in comparison to UK?
Well, the US has always been very different in its whole approach to entrepreneurship and risk. That's always been the case, and frankly, that will never change. It's almost sort of endemic in its history and how America evolved as a nation, and all of that. That will never change. And you need only look at the US approach to data protection regulation to see just how that much differs to what's happening in Europe and the UK. And a very similar stance is being adopted with AI. And the US has very valid reasons for doing that. It's a different jurisdictional court system. Everything is different. In America. Each state has its own laws. We don't have that here in the UK. We have acts of parliament that apply across across the whole piece, with very few rare exceptions. So it's comparing two very different jurisdictions for a start. I can understand the US frustration with our conservative approach here, but the way we've developed here in the UK is fundamentally different. And for us to try and tailor our approach, it just wouldn't work. Constitutionally, we can't do it. Our parliamentary framework doesn't allow that to be the case. We don't have the same freedom for companies to lobby, for example, for acts of parliament. In America, it's very easy for large organizations to lobby for laws to go through the Senate and Congress. And, in the UK, there's some really, really strict benchmarks around the extent to which companies can actually lobby and influence parliamentarians to pass specific laws that benefit the industry that company is working in. So, Anastasija, they're very, very different things, but I can understand the tensions as well on both sides, right? I'm British Nigerian. I can understand the tensions from this side. And likewise, if I was American, US national, I'd find it hugely frustrating. Why aren't you more avant-garde? Why are you Brits so conservative, so risk-averse? It's a perennial challenge, and the tension will always be there.
I love your approach because it seems like it's very unfair comparison and comparing apples and oranges.
Very much so.
But out there, it seems kind of like black and white. But when you explain it, more in detail, it makes so much more sense.
When you say out there, do you mean social media?
Yeah, social media, like you said,
You've got
clickbait.
30 seconds to digest.
Yeah, 30 seconds to understand everything on complexity of like the law. Amazing. If the let's say enterprise buyer, right, sends a security questionnaire to a founder, right, and asking about their AI policy and data processing agreement in the UK, what does startup like genuinely need to cover that in your experience?
Yeah. So a startup and all the companies that I'm general counsel for, before we launch, I make sure they have the full suite of documentation that's required, every possible policy, all the standard contracts that we need, everything that's going to be relevant for the business as of launch needs to be in place before we launch. And it's, I believe in the use of plain English. I'm not one of these lawyers who uses long, convoluted terms. I use very simple, contractual language. And so it's, anyone can understand it very quickly. And that helps the whole business process and helps us to launch. Frankly, it's in everyone's interest for us to launch successfully and to be able to commercialize. So all those things will be in place. Every single client I'm currently working with and alongside, they have all that documentation in place as of the point when they need it. And that then becomes the foundation for moving forward. We then tailor and adapt, and as new products and services are offered, we then slightly adapt things. But it means that we're launch ready. You know, when I say to a client that phase one will mean by the end of the 3 months, 4 months, whatever, we're ready to launch, I really do mean that in its full entirety. And I'm really proud to say that I've done that, you know, for every single client that's come to me at that launch phase or pre-launch. I've managed to achieve that with every single one. And that's been critical to their launch success, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, it's obviously my question is like answer in 3 seconds. What is it that all the complexity, but obviously makes sense that it's much more complicated than just make sure you have this document and this
Yeah,
document, right?
it is.
Yeah.
It is. It depends how many
Okay.
employees they have. You know, they
Yeah.
have a certain number of employees, health and safety regulation comes in. You know, there's so much more nuance to it. But a good lawyer will make sure you have your suite ready before you launch. That's the key message here.
And so, yeah, so that's with startup. I wanted to ask you about the PE space, because according to
Yeah.
Deloitte, that only like 58% of PE-backed companies have no formal AI strategy at acquisition, right? So how would you approach that? Where would they start? Like if you're working with that PE space?
Yeah. So I've had that come up. I had a company I worked with last year that was in that space, highly acquisitive. And I did an audit where we were globally across, you know, everything really, all areas of risk, not just legal. Because I've been a commercial leader as well, I've run business units and had P&L accountability. I was able to cover aspects of that with sales and marketing and business development and so on. And then I did a RAG analysis, you know, red, amber, green, did a one pager. These are the core risks. This is what I recommend. And this is where we need to move to, because there's only so much that can be addressed in any period of time. Priorities are constantly shifting, I find, and people can only do so much. You know, companies, it still boils down to individuals having to do all this work. So I find that a RAG analysis is what I go to. I always do a one pager RAG analysis after I've done my sort of investigatory work. I've spoken to a few key stakeholders. I know what to look out for at this stage in my career as well. I'm so familiar with all the areas of risk. And that's how we dealt with that particular situation. And, you know, managing the insurers was a big part of it. Talking to the insurance brokers about various heads of cover and so on. But again, it was done in a very proactive way. So clients were hugely reassured. And I was made sure we communicated with clients that we were doing this, because other providers weren't. You know, they weren't doing this work. And we were able to gain sort of market advantage by showing that we were being very transparent about what we were doing to address some of these gaps. And it brought us a lot of kudos in winning new business as well, which was wonderful. So, you know, it's so important for the commercial reality to get this right. And transparency is really important, Anastasija, in all of that.
What are you most excited about for the next 12 months?
I'm really excited about what agents can do, AI agents. I'm working with two companies that develop agents and are doing so responsibly and ethically. And it is incredible what agents can do, because what they do is they free up capacity for human beings for the things that only humans can do, which we still really value. The emotional intelligence point that my son, you know, advised us of, as I referenced earlier. Agents are incredible in what they can do. And I'm really excited about where we'll get to with agents in the next 12 months. I think it's going to be a very exciting time.
Me too. I love that. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you join us. Thank you so much for your time and energy. And if somebody wants to reach out or connect or find you or learn more, what's the best place to do that?
Thank you. No, it's been a real pleasure being your guest today. So I can be found on LinkedIn, Funke Abimbola MBE. I'm the only one with that name and title on LinkedIn. I also have a website, at funkeabimbola.com. I'm on my website as well, and that's where you'll find information about other aspects of what I do. I do lots of public speaking, leadership, focus work, etc. as well. But yeah, I'd love to hear from anyone who thinks there might be synergies between us. It'd be wonderful to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was absolutely fantastic. I learned so much from just this conversation. It's a shame we don't have another 3 hours.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.